Jay Dyer has been advertising his Orthodox Christianity Discord server. He invited people of different faith backgrounds and different philosophical worldviews to come debate in his server. Obviously, he was also inviting Orthodox Christians and people who want to join the church to ask questions and fellowship, I suppose. So I took him up on this. I went in to that server on Sunday for the first time, and as I was checking it out, I noticed there was a voice chat going on with probably 70 or 80 people. I hopped in and I heard Jay talking to someone else about whether another concept of God could address the problem of universals, which is a classic problem in philosophy, as well as the Orthodox Christian concept of God. Jay was just explaining why something like Zeus or Odin doesn't do this in the same way. I didn't hear the full explanation. This is just where I jumped in. And this is interesting timing because I'd been thinking before Sunday about making a video about Christianity and the developments in Christianity online lately. A lot of people from the spheres that I've been in for a number of years on YouTube have been migrating towards Christianity, which I think is a good thing. A lot of them have been going for Orthodoxy or Catholicism. And I think on an individual basis, that is the healthy way to go. People need some feeling of meaning in their lives. They need some kind of ethical guide. They mostly, though, just need some kind of hope. And Christianity does give hope. So I think I sympathize with people who go for Orthodox Christianity, but they don't hold reason as a kind of methodological first principle. And what I mean by that is they don't accept that it's possible to be reasoned out of their position because they don't appeal to reason for their position. They will use reason to argue for it. They believe that there is a compatibility between reason and revelation, but they don't accept the possibility that they could rationally be demonstrated to be wrong. And I think Jay would agree with that. They don't put dialectics first, philosophical dialectics. They don't put reason first. They put their system, which is viewed as a whole. By the standards, the epistemological standards of their system stands up. And other systems also have problems. And so Jay is comfortable defending Orthodoxy by basically declaring that it is coherent, which it for the most part is, and it's meaningful, it works as a system, and he will attack any other system, trying to attack other systems on the basis that they are not coherent. Generally, this is his approach. Which is all well and good, but if you have two competing systems that are both coherent, which both appeal to their own epistemic standards, like the revelation contained in the Christian scriptures on the one hand, the revelation contained in the Quran on the other hand, or any other hypothetical system. I can invent a philosophical system right now which says that my thoughts come straight from the ground of being, and therefore I know everything that I think is true. And that is not necessarily self-contradictory unless you demonstrate that I am thinking things in a self-contradictory way. But if you want to dig deep enough, you can say the intuitions that you're using to demonstrate that my thought is self-contradictory are not valid. And the alternative set of intuitions that I have, which don't allow for contradiction, those are genuine. So I think, you can maintain some form of solipsism ultimately on the basis that it's coherent. And it can be meaningful for you. So I don't like this move to go ahead and just defend that my system works, it's coherent. I'm not going to appeal to reason as the ultimate principle. I think we all exist in a common community of language, and whenever we engage in discourse, we all are ultimately appealing to reason in one form or another. Jay appeals to reason to try to convert people to orthodoxy, and to deny that you would accept reason as that highest principle in determining what you ultimately think, you're kind of being deceptive in a way, because you got to your position through some kind of rational process. You might also have emotional reasons for adopting your position. But to kind of use arguments to get into the position and then to kick the ladder away, to not let anyone out of the position if it turns out to not be as reasonable as some other position, that's a move that I can't defend. Now, I accept that people need religion. I want people to have faith. It helps people. And also, I'm a Christian. I believe it is essentially true. I don't believe that every detail in the Old Testament is true. My real problem with Orthodoxy, as Jay describes it, is it's a creationist creed. It rejects the theory of evolution. It rejects geology, the data from geology on the age of the earth. Now, people can hand wave away radiocarbon dating or the stratigraphic method in archaeology, or all of these different complementary systems of dating, or they can say that the sum of them are all self-referential and therefore not reliable for some reason. But the people who hand wave these away are generally not really knowledgeable about archaeological methods or geological methods or the theories in geology that lead to these opinions, or how they dovetail with the theories in physics. There are many theories in many different branches of science that I can understand on their own basis. I'm not saying I'm an expert in all science, but I can understand the arguments in physics for the age of the universe from the phenomena that we observe, the expansion rate, the raw data that we get from the background microwave radiation. I don't understand it all on a technical level, but the story of the evolution of the cosmos all fits together, and it fits together with everything that I observe. And theory of evolution as well, they just a network of accepted theories do work quite well together, and they point to a certain time frame for the existence of the earth, the existence of humanity. So just on that basis, you have to reject a lot of scientific knowledge if you want to maintain that Orthodox Christian position. Now, some Orthodox Christians will claim that you don't have to interpret the Bible literally in historical matters to be an Orthodox Christian. But Jay would point to the church fathers maintaining such positions. And so if you want to be kind of loose with your orthodoxy, like ultimately, what defines Orthodox Christianity against non-Orthodox Christianity? If you're going to be Orthodox Christian, I kind of think you should take Jay's approach and just drill it into something definite, something that's attested in the first 1,000 years of the church, the way Jay often puts it. But yeah, I like science. I use arguments from physics in my own philosophical system. I appeal to the data from physics. I follow physicists like Max Tegmark or David Deutsch or, Brian Greene or whatever, any of these people who write the popular books, and the people who are kind of on the fringes of things with different physical models. I could probably think of more examples of people I've looked at recently, but those are my favorites that I just mentioned. Brian Greene, I'm not the hugest fan of, whatever. I don't want to get into that, but I like, using these arguments because they make sense to me rationally. When I look at the question of whether something makes sense, I question to myself, what is the data that has to be explained and what are the candidate explanations? And then, you pick whatever explanation works the best in terms of predictive power that you can get out of it, in terms of the explanatory power in detail. Like something can explain some details, but not all details. It's not as good as an explanation that explains all the details. Or parsimony. If your explanation requires a bunch of auxiliary dimensions and things that we don't see, and it doesn't explain something extra, then I'm not going to accept it. On the other hand, I would accept postulates of other dimensions if that brings extra explanatory power that wasn't already there. So basically, like coherence, explanatory power, parsimony exist in a kind of hierarchical relation in my concept of epistemological criteria. Now, that's joined into my own theory, why I think that's a good basis for determining a true hypothesis from a false hypothesis has to do with my other priors. It always will. Our epistemology is within our worldview, not before our worldview. So that's this kind of Quinean notion that you do ultimately have to compare whole paradigms. And then that whole idea that we look at particular problems and then pick the best explanation, that's Popperian principle, a kind of evolutionary epistemology where the theories that survive new challenges are the ones that will continue. And even if we don't have a great foundationalist justification for one given hypothesis, if it's the best thing we have, then we go with that. So using these sorts of methods, I generally accept most of mainstream science. Not all of it, not science of human differences and various particular things that are mainstream for ideological reasons, I think. But I can't just abandon reason because the scientific method has demonstrated that it does work. It's engineerable. The theories from physics are engineerable. And I have an eye towards my own theories metaphysically that dovetail with physics that could in principle be engineerable in certain ways. And, I would like to dig into those possibilities. If I accepted Orthodox Christianity, I would have to reject my metaphysics, and then I couldn't explore those physical theories, the engineering possibilities out of them. So if I'm right now and I can continue my path of research, maybe one day I could build a new technology, maybe even some kind of psychic technology, something not like existing technology using an alternative metaphysical paradigm. If I went that way and found something great, it would just be a shame if that possibility was lost entirely because I have to accept the Bible in its entirety because why? The position is coherent. There's nothing incoherent that I see in my own position. So that's really the crux of the discussion Jay and I had, whether my position was coherent. That's not why I came into the server. I came in asking questions. I wanted to understand the Orthodox response to various philosophical problems. We touched on a number of issues, but the first I asked, why couldn't Platonism account for the problem of universals as well as the Orthodox concept of God? And Jay said that basically in Platonism, the realm of forms is disconnected from our world. There's no way to tie the differentiated world of our experience back to the realm of forms. And the realm of forms is fundamentally one. And so if you're going to join these two things, ultimately you're going to have to smush all the distinctions of experience of the world around us into this and deny that ultimately as a kind of shadow reality, which Plato obviously does. Then again, so does Hinduism. This is the perennialist position. The first articulation of it in history is in the Upanishads, but a ton of systems have gone for this basic move to essentially deny the ultimacy of physical distinctions. That's not to say that the distinctions don't have a kind of reality. They do. They're just not ultimate distinctions. They are apparent. They're aspects of the apparition of phenomenal reality, in the same way that like a dream is not ultimately real, but the information of the dream is still real information. You really had the dream. So you really experience phenomena. You really have knowledge of the phenomenal world, even if the supposed material objects external to yourself are not truly external to yourself. So he claimed that to say that all of reality is really somehow a projection of my mind is ridiculous. And I asked why that's ridiculous. He pointed to the problem of knowledge, saying that if reality is all illusory, and he's used this move many times, if reality is ultimately illusory, then how do you know the thought process that led you to recognize that isn't itself illusory? Well, you're smushing, in that case, you're conflating different meanings of the word illusion, right? An illusion, a projection, operates according to a kind of logic. The logic, if you take a projector, a Scooby-Doo projector, and trick someone into seeing a ghost, it was an illusion, it wasn't a real ghost. But the projector operates according to a certain kind of logic. So it's not necessarily true that just because the distinctions in physical reality aren't ultimate, that the underlying substrate of these apparent distinctions isn't constant, doesn't have a kind of metaphysical ultimacy and reliability, that the logic of the world is real even if distinct physical objects aren't ultimately real. They're real in the sense that they're real given a perspective. They're only real as objects in light of a subject-object distinction, in other words, in this position that I'm articulating. But I wasn't trying to argue my position. Again, I was trying to get in to ask Jay how he can tell the difference between apparent distinctions and these real distinctions that he's putting forward. All of this circles around the central issue in modern philosophy, which is how much of what I perceive in the world is there in the world, and how much am I bringing to the table? Locke put this in terms of primary and secondary qualities. He would say primary qualities are things like impenetrability, extension, mass, and secondary qualities would be things like color and taste. Plato's classical example of this is if I taste wine when I'm sick, it might seem bitter. If I taste it when I'm healthy, it might seem sweet. So our disposition can alter the nature of our sense perception. In light of that, Locke says, well, there has to be some reality to material things, but it's not these particular sensory modalities, it's these other sensory modalities. But then the rest of modern philosophy with like Berkeley, really most of it was accomplished, smushing the primary and secondary qualities together, saying that we don't have any reason to suppose that these basic qualities aren't still a fundamentally mental property. We can't think away the mind and leave extension. Obviously, we can't think pure extension without color. We can't think these things in isolation from the other aspects of mind. So Kant, will basically include all the categories of causality that he identifies, space-time, all the aspects of the world of phenomenal reality into these mental attributes, and the underlying physical world, whatever it is, the real world underlying phenomena, he describes as noumena and says that we basically can't fundamentally know it. So that this is the central issue that we were talking about, me and Jay. And I did raise this, I kind of rephrased it, and he was, of course, interrupting and being rude and saying I have a sophomoric knowledge of philosophy and just being kind of a jerk, which he does. He gets aggressive and tries to make people feel uncomfortable because he tries to win debates. He doesn't prioritize reason. That's the thing. You shouldn't expect him to have a reverence for like a pure pursuit of the truth if he doesn't prioritize reason. He thinks he has the truth already indelibly no matter what. So why not instrumentalize debate and use whatever tactics are appropriate to the purpose? It makes sense within the logic of his position. His behavior does. And I was polite to him, although I was not being rude. I think there were 80 people there. If anyone thinks that I was being rude, go ahead and testify to that and say how I was being rude. I don't think I was. But anyway, I kind of phrased this in terms of the problem of primary and secondary qualities. How do you know that there are these primary qualities in things? And since you're claiming that there are these, what are they? This was because he said, so again, the question I asked before was, how do you know that a reality as a mental projection is absurd on the face of it. And he appealed to the problem of knowledge, saying, to have knowledge, there has to be an external world. So again, I asked why there has to be an external world. He would say that there has to be something for the knower to know. If there's a distinction between the knower and the known, if there's nothing outside of the knower, then you can't really have knowledge. I then asked, why can't you know your own mind? Why does there have to be an ontological distinction between a discrete knower and a discrete known? And he would say that the problem in my reasoning, reducing everything to mind ultimately, is the same as that with Descartes, where Descartes assumes the validity of language, he assumes these various things, and so he can't strip everything else away and just go to a pure rationality of the mind. I agree with that, but for a different reason. He asked if I knew any critiques of Descartes, and I referenced Schelling's critique, which is that not that Descartes assumes language generally, but that he assumes the grammatical formalism of cogito. I think. Subject and verb are baked into that formalism. And that's a kind of metaphysical proposition, that I am the subject and there is the object. And that leads to a kind of rift in Cartesian philosophy, which is acknowledged by later philosophers, between this, and it ultimately manifests as the phenomenal noumenal distinction in Kant, I think, consistently. But in Descartes himself, you get this rift between mental and physical substances. So, he would say that Descartes' problem, though, is that he can't think away language. He always assumes all these various things. And so Jay would like to say we have to assume the existence of the physical world, the kind of holistic gestalt of experience and the common sense understandings that we have, and all of it has to be taken together. You can't go back to this questioning everything, going back to first principles of what do I fundamentally know, because there's just too much assumed in that. That is a hand wave in essence. So I redirected back at him, because again, I was not trying to defend my position at this point. I redirect back at him, asking how he knows that there is an external world, and if, assuming there is one, what are the primary qualities and what are the secondary qualities? What are the real distinctions in nature, in the physical world, and what are the distinctions that we bring to the table in our perception? Like the color or taste elements, where they can be different depending on our disposition. So ultimately, Jay did articulate the Orthodox position on this basic question, which is that objects do participate of the forms, logi, in God's mind. So there's a multiplicity of participation in an object. It's not just a material body, right? There is this kind of larger quality to the object than just the stuff that it's made of. But I mean, an idealist Platonist conception could easily have the objects partaking of these forms, but still being fundamentally a mental object and not an independent physical object. For Orthodoxy, the object itself does have an essence that's not accidental, that's not a factor of representation, that's independent of the mind, but that essence can only be known apophatically. We can't describe it cataphatically directly. We can only describe it by what it's not, in the same way that you describe God's essence in Orthodoxy. We can't know God's essence. We can't know God in Thomism either. Divine simplicity is too other, radically other. We can't describe it in terms of human categories of knowledge. That just follows, because if you put God in one category, then he's no longer metaphysically ultimate, because his definition is contingent on this categorical schema. So the metaphysical ultimate in reality has to be beyond category, and therefore only characterizable in apophatic terms. But that's more of this Thomist and ultimately perennialist approach to the question. And that's why the one in Platonism is not just a strict simplicity in terms of a complexity-simplicity opposition. I mean, you can read the Platonists, the Neoplatonists yourself on this point. They would not accept that. They were aware of this problem. And so like the one in Platonism is more like a superposition of the one and the many. It is a joining of the one and the many, but the one has a preeminence over the many. I don't want to get too are into that, because I do want to recount the rest of this conversation with Jay. So he said, we can't know these essences. And I started asking, like, what does that bring to the table in terms of an explanation? Like, why, if the best, so it was around this time also that I was identified as Airval from YouTube. And I also asked shortly before this, like, I don't want to monopolize your time. I don't want to come in here and evangelize my system. If anyone else has questions, like, I don't want to take all of your time. And Jay said no one else was talking. And so then I went on. So it's not like I came in, I was being a jerk and not letting anyone else talk. I offered to back off. No one interrupted me besides Jay. It was just Jay and I talking the whole time. So I was identified as Airful, and then Jay wanted me to defend my system because I kept on asking these questions about how Orthodoxy responds to these various classic problems in philosophy. And, I think he got uncomfortable with that, and he wanted to be on the offensive where he feels more comfortable in debate. And so at this point, he started interrupting more and more frequently. I was trying to say that our best description of any object is in terms of distinctions that are phenomenal, is in terms of information fundamentally. When we characterize something mathematically, which is the most accurate way we can describe currently any physical system, it's in terms of mathematical objects which are defined always relative to one another. And so why can't physical objects simply be those distinctions? And then I was also trying to get to recent physics where information itself is measurably massive. Information is mass, is energy. That's basically been established so far in modern physics. Space-time, the world as we see it, is emergent from more fundamental layers of reality, which are kind of pure information. That's widely accepted in physics today. So I was trying to appeal to that in a sense, but also just give a grounds from this general scientific worldview that's out there for claiming that the nature of objects is not fundamentally separate from the mind. Informational distinctions are always contingent on some perspective which observes them. But he shifted into asking, like, how I can trust my own reasoning process. And this is really a different topic from that, and we didn't carry on that argument to its implications, which are also interesting in their own right. But he went into how I can trust my reasoning, and I appealed to Chris Langan's notion of syndifionesis, which is the idea that any two objects must exist within a common medium. If they're intelligible distinctions, there's a common syntactic medium which joins them. There's some kind of common logic to the two things, if we posit two things, whenever we do. And he asked how I know that, and I was trying to, it's so tough being interrupted constantly and not being allowed to actually express your hypothesis. But why I can trust reason is based on this principle of syndiffionic regression, which uses syndifionesis iteratively to say that, okay, my mind operates according to a mental syntax. There are discrete mental objects. There's the mental law that underlies it. The mental law has different aspects. There are different particular mental operations. There's a set of mental operations that are available. These operations exist in terms of a physical syntax. Mental operations are possible because of the architecture of the brain. And the architecture of the brain is possible because of these physical laws. And so you carry forward analyzing the nature of a syntax and its laws in terms of its objects, and then you go deeper to find what unifies all of these various objects in the level of syntax. You go from physics, and what do all these physical laws have in common? The laws of logic, mathematics. And so then you get more to this kind of Platonist realm of forms level of things. And at the core of that, you'll find ultimately something simple that's the ground of all further order. And every being must necessarily have that at its fundamental core. Syndiffionic regression gets you there, and that's basically the philosophy of Atman is Brahman from the Upanishads. And so if that's the case, then my mental operations have access to the fundamental nature of reality. And that's why my reasoning is trustworthy and at least can potentially access truth. It doesn't give you a guarantee that your particular philosophical arguments are valid. It just says that they could, in principle, access the nature of reality. Jay did not let me finish that though. And he kept saying, like, my starting point, I can appeal to God and God's revelation, and God gives me this knowledge. My senses are trustworthy, my reasoning is trustworthy, because the good God would not deceive us. But for you, you're starting from your own mind. You're starting from this kind of Cartesian doubt and your own rationalization. And how can you trust that? And I was giving my explanation. I was trying to justify my whole method of argument in as much of a foundationalist way as he was asking for, but also appealing to holism, also appealing to the Duhem Quine thesis and the things that he's appealed to. But he kept on interrupting me. And so finally I said, well, I would like to give my justification, but you won't let me finish. And then he said, well, that's it. And he kicked me at that point. So I thought that was pretty immature. I don't think I was being uncharitable in my approach to the conversation. I did want to ask more questions and get deeper into things, but that possibility is not offered to me. I wanted to share this just because Jay is publicly offering to debate. He bills himself as having this great rational ground for the Orthodox Christian position. I don't think it ultimately is that, though. And the people who are being sucked into it, many of them need it psychologically, and it's good that they have it, but some of them don't really need it, and they can do better by sticking to reason and prioritizing truth over what makes you comfortable. Jay, I think, needs Christianity, needs Orthodox Christianity, and I don't blame him for being the way he is, but and he's valuable in so many ways, and all of the research, he is a hard worker, he's done a lot of good research, I don't dislike him, I do like him, but he's wrong when it comes to the validity of his position, and he could learn to debate a little bit more kindly in the future, I think. But I just wanted to share that story with you, and I'll talk more about, obviously, my position that I was defending in the future. Thank you guys for listening.